Hi, it's Gary back again. Welcome to my latest video. In this one I'm going to be doing some work around the area of the tee on the 18th hole of my latest course. I'm going to add in some tee boxes, and I'm also going to put some sand dunes in, as well as a little bit of elevation work and some texturing. So to start off with here, I'm going to put in some tee boxes. Now I'm going to draw them in with the tee fringe texture. I just find that one the best one to use on links courses because you don't have any cross hatches. I'm using the box drawing, so even though it's freehand, it's going to give me less control points to worry about. So I'm going to draw in a couple. I'm not actually measuring them out. I'll do that at a later date. I'm just putting them in at the moment to show you how they're going to look. So I'm struggling here a little bit with the terrain. So a little tip is, if you add in a human height, so you type in there human, put it in, and then double click on it on the hierarchy, it takes you down to it, and it stops the terrain from, or stops you having issues with terrain clipping, where you actually you're going through the terrain too much. You don't have as much control over your viewport. So that's a little tip. Now I've deleted out some of the control points there, which is shift and click. Basically what I'm trying to get to is just a square, or a quadrilateral, I think it is. So I'm just deleting those out, so I'm getting a nice easy shape that I can manipulate. Just measuring it out here at the moment. What I plan to do then is flatten the terrain around the tee box to make it look more aesthetically pleasing, and also obviously you need a flat tee box. So pressing shift there to get the terrain height. I'm just going to up the opacity a bit, and then I'm going to start painting the terrain to flatten it. So we're flattening it out there. I don't like too big a step, but at the moment, because we're only roughing it out, I'm just trying to get it flat really to where I want it to go. And then I'll grab one of these control points and build the spline to see what it looks like. And there it is, popped into the terrain. So like I say, it's very rough at the moment, because I'd like to do, or I would imagine everyone would do, all of their major terrain sculpting work first and then move on. A little hint there, or a little thing that I do when I'm building tee boxes, I tend to have them so they're dropping down from the back where it's slightly higher, and then gets to the middle one and slightly lower. When I'm actually measuring out the terrain or setting the level, if I press shift on the slope from the previous tee box, I find it gives me a reasonable height to work with. So it drops a little bit, but it doesn't drop too much, obviously, because it's still on the slope from the previous one. So that usually works quite well for me. So again, laying these ones out, I'll go back later and measure them against where the bunkers are and where the specific points on the fairway are that I'd like the ball to land, and just to make sure that there's nothing majorly out of place. So that's the 3 tee boxes laid, and now what I want to do is just smooth the area around them to make it look a bit more natural. I mean, there's still lots more work to do other than just the smoothing, but the smoothing is a good start. So I'm smoothing around all the drop-offs and bits and pieces, as you can see. So it's not looking too bad there. They're not quite lined up. There's a bit of work to do just lining up those tee boxes to make them look like they should. So I'm just doing that at the moment. So yeah, and next I may do, there'll probably be a bit more smoothing involved, and then what I tend to do is just do a little bit of elevation work around the tee boxes to make them look more natural. I don't like the steep slopes that they create. So here, just turn the opacity up a bit. So here what I'm doing is I'm just building in a little bit of elevation work around the tee boxes, around the slopes, so you don't just have one steep drop off. It looks a bit more like they were actually cut into the terrain, like they would naturally be there, rather than they've just been plonked in and then the height been just adjusted. So yeah, I mean, it's all really, it's all about what your preference is, you know. But I like that. I think that looks okay there like that. I'm just moving that one back a little bit, so I can just readjust, re-smooth in a little bit further out. And it isn't going to have a drop off at the front of the tee box, because you need the whole tee box to be flat really. And then looking at the second one, I think there's a slight issue maybe where it's just dropped off on the front corner. So what I'll do is I'll just level that bit out and smooth it again. So yeah, just level that out there, and then just smooth it around so it's all flat everywhere. So that's looking quite good. I think what I'm going to do now is just add in some of the semi-rough spline around the tee boxes and the rough spline around the tee boxes, just to finish them off. Like I said, I no doubt will revisit this again, and just it's probably a good idea just to measure up the distances from the tee boxes to see how they're going to interact with the rest of the hole. You know, you don't want to be able to fly every bunker and land it onto the widest part of a fairway from any of the boxes really. So you may need to add in an extra bunker here or there. You may need to nip the fairway in a bit further down. I tend to do the shortest tee box to help the simulator players. I didn't do it on Wells Hollows when I built that, which was my first one for Jack Nicklaus Golf. I didn't even think about it, to be honest with you. I was just designing it purely from a computer golfer point of view. So I probably could have looked into that a bit more really. So I'm still learning with the simulator golfs, because I don't own a simulator. I don't know, what they're actually looking for. So if there's anybody out there who's got a simulator and they have any specific requests when it comes to designing, then just let me know, because I want it to work for everyone. You can see there's a slight problem that hasn't quite built the splines properly, because the splines were too close together. Move them apart slightly and then it's okay. Now, as you can see, it's not blended into the terrain very well. So now what I'm going to do is take my brush and just paint on a texture which I've tried to match as closely to the deep rough texture or the rough texture as I can, just to just so it blends in better. So just paint that around the outside, and then if I come in and switch off the splines so you can't see them, you can see that that's pretty good there. It's blended in quite nicely, and that's the first part of the work done. The tee boxes eventually will be a lot more naturally sculpted, but at the moment that's where they're at. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to select the sand texture and start painting in some areas for where I'm going to lay the dunes. So I turn the opacity down. I don't want it all the way up to 100 and the target strength, and just bring the brush size in and just start painting in sort of swirly patterns basically, and this is where the dunes are going to they're going to appear a bit later on when I start the elevation work. I try to make it so that the sand is touching another piece of sand all the way along. So I don't know whether that needs to be done or not. I'm not sure, but I feel like it just gives it a bit more of a natural feel. If there aren't any isolated pockets of sand that are completely surrounded by grass, probably no reason to do it that way, but it's just how I view it really. So there you can see I've painted quite a few on, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start to raise the areas of grass around where I've painted on the sand. So that's going to give the idea that the mounds are the grassy areas of the dunes, and so where the natural terrain dips is where the sand has been allowed to seep in, and the grass is growing around it on the mounds. So I tend to use a lot, most of the time when I'm doing this sort of finer texture terrain detail, I tend to use an opacity of somewhere between 1 and 4. Don't usually go any higher than that, because you start to get real spikes, especially as your brush size is usually going to be pretty small. Sort of 4 to 8 is a favourite brush size of mine for doing this sort of thing. If I'm working around bunkers, it's usually I'll have a brush size of 4 and an opacity of about 2. If I'm doing slightly bigger work, then both of those go up accordingly. So there you can see I'm just roughing them in. I'll smooth them down in a little, later. It's just getting the basic elevations in at the moment. And you can go a little bit overboard because you can always smooth it back down. So you don't need to worry too much. So that's built, that's done in now. Here I'm selecting a different brush and I'm just going to paint in a little bit of sort of bumpiness to the sand. I'll smooth all of it down afterwards and just taking a little bit away there so it looks a bit better when the waves crash against the sand. So it's just to give a little bit of texture, not texture, a little bit of elevation change to the sand so it doesn't just look like a flat piece of ground. And then I'll smooth that off with a low opacity, so I'm keeping quite a lot of the detail in there. And I'll just smooth it and see how that looks, and it's pretty good. I don't want it to be a completely flat piece of sand because then it doesn't look right. And now I'm going over and smoothing all the bumps that I've just created for the dunes. It looks okay. It's very odd. It doesn't always look brilliant when you first do it. It looks a little bit pixelated, but when you start adding in extra textures and bits and pieces, it tends to fill it out, and then it looks a lot more natural. So here, there's quite a slope coming off of, I think that's the first green, down to this area. So I'm just doing a little bit of work just to make it so the slope isn't quite as steep and it's a little bit more gradual. Eventually I'll be putting a cart path down there somewhere, but at the moment I'm just trying to work on it, building up the layers of elevation work. So this bit gets done, and then if you want to flatten afterwards, you're flattening on an already completed or sculpted piece of terrain rather than trying to bring it up around a flat piece of terrain. So again, using a different brush, I always find this one quite useful, just raising the areas ever so slightly around to give it a more rugged feel. And then what I'll do afterwards is just go over that and smooth it all down again. But you're building up layers and layers of elevation so then it becomes more natural. Here I'm just going to start painting a bit of that terrain, just to make it look, give it a bit more definition. So I'm dropping a few more because I think the dunes looked a little bit like they were in a crescent shape, and it looked a little bit too obvious. So if I just pull some of those out a little bit, it's going to make it look a little less obvious, a little less contrived, and a little bit more natural. So what I'll do is just paint those, and then I'll go with the elevation tool and raise those up a little bit and smooth it out, and then we should have a slightly better looking and slightly more natural looking dune area, rather than something that looks like it's been built by someone. I want it to look like nature's intended it that way. So I'm just raising these up a bit now, just these new bits that we've built, that we've painted in, we're just raising them up, and then we'll smooth them out and we'll take a look, and hopefully that should look a lot more natural, a lot more like actual dunes rather than something that's been purposefully put there. I'm now going to paint on a little bit of a different texture, just to give them a bit of life, really. So you haven't got just one simple texture on there. So you're just painting in a little bit of a different colour, just to give them a bit of something different. Trying to make it look a bit more natural. And I'm painting on the sand as well as the grass. You're just overlaying. I find the process of this it's the same as when you're doing elevation work. You're building up layers of elevation here. You're building up layers of textures. You're just trying to make it look as natural as possible, really. So I'm painting in a bit around now. I've probably gone a little bit too, or not quite as transparent as I want it to be there. It's a little bit too obvious the difference. So just going to paint over a few different textures just to try and darken that down a bit, make it look a bit more mudgy, a bit more natural. So it's not too bad there. I'll move on to this bit here now, which is where the pathway is going to be. Now that's way too much there. The opacity is up too high, the target strength's up too high. So I'm just going to paint a bit of green over the top of that, just to try and hide that a bit. It's all trial and error really. It's just practicing, painting, and you can always go back over the top of it. So if it doesn't look right, you can just paint back over the top of it. So it's not too much of a big deal. I mean, that looks okay, but that, to me, that's too obvious there. So I'm going to start painting a slightly darker colour on. Probably try and paint a bit more green back into it as well, just to lose that real obvious split, the obvious break between the textures. So, and that looks better there really already. So that's looking pretty good. And already you've changed it from a flat piece of land into something that's a lot more real looking with the textures and the elevation work. So just smooth all that out now. That's basically what we're doing here. We're just giving it smooth, making it look a bit more real. And now we're going to move on to the grasses. So low target strength, start painting on the grasses, and I'm only painting them onto the areas where it's green. So I'm only painting them onto the actual grass. I'm not painting them onto the sand. And I'm not going mad. I'll miss some parts out. I'm not going to just plaster it all over everywhere. I want it to look like, it's reasonably natural. Just gone over the sand a bit there. So just shift and get rid of that bit off. And then, so basically all I'm doing here is just roughly painting out some of the grass textures onto this sand, onto this grass. And like I say, no need to go mad. You don't need to just cover the whole lot. You can go a little bit over, you can put a bit on the sand, or that's how it is, and then add into the second grass, start painting that on. And I'm just, with this one, I'm going even less. I'm just painting little areas of it. So I'm not painting large swathes of this grass. It's just so it breaks up the predominant grass that I've put in there. So that looks quite good. I think that's not too bad. Back into the human height again, because I was just struggling with how much the viewport was moving around with my mouse. And then back into the grasses, start painting again. Like I say, just little bits here and there. It doesn't have to be mad. Don't have to fill it, don't have to fill up every area, every piece of green texture with grass. You're just trying to give it a flavour, really. So, and then you can hopefully start to see the dunes coming to life a bit where we've added in the grass. And it all comes together. You start off by looking, thinking, don't think that quite works. By the end of it, you think, yeah, okay, that's looking pretty good now. I'm quite happy with it. So still feel maybe the dunes are a little high, so I'll probably just drop those down a bit, because I get the feeling off the tee they're going to be a little bit high up, a little bit intruding too much onto the scene. So and this is really there for visual effect, really. Doesn't do anything for the game. You're not going to be driving into that. You're not going to be going anywhere near it. It's it's just off the tee, so you're going to be hitting straight over it. But visuals are as important in this game than strategy is. So there you can see maybe just a little high. I'm not sure. So I probably will bring that down a little bit. I'm just doing a little bit of work now on the beach. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to paint some slightly darker areas where the sea would be lapping onto the beach, so it looks more realistic, like the sea is actually making the sand wet, which makes it darker. So I'm just painting a bit of that on. Again, it's just a bit of care, really. If you've got just lots of just flat, plain, bland textures, you're not going to get. It's not going to look real, and it takes a bit of time. Okay, it takes a little bit of time to get it right, but I think at the end of the day it's worth it because it gives you a much more visually appealing course. And you know, good courses are you know, partly good strategy, but definitely good looks. If your course looks ugly, and people probably won't want to play it very often, you know, because who would? So they're looking again. I'm just looking at that, and I think it's a bit high. So I'm just going to smooth this little area around here first, which I've missed out, and I think I'm just going to bring that down ever so slightly off the tee. I just think it's a little bit high. So I'm just going to increase my brush size quite high and turn my opacity down and just start lowering areas a little bit. It's up by the fairway, I think, where most of the issue is, where it just raises quite considerably there. And I just want that to drop down. I don't want the dunes dominating the tee off. I still want the player to see the fairway off the tee, you know, and just to just have the dunes there in, you know, almost as a part of their peripheral vision, but not something you're looking directly at where you can't see anything else. That looks a lot better, I think. So yeah, I mean, we're looking quite good. I quite like that, and I think we'll take a look and see what that looks like in the game. Now I will say that this is how it originally looked. So as you can see, not a flat piece of land here, and the sand is just cutting in. There's no dunes. And then if we look how we've changed it just through those 20 minutes of work, you can see the tees have been added in, the dunes are in here. You know, we've done some work on the beach, and then we've done this work up here on the left hand side, and I think it looks a lot better. So I'm quite impressed with that, really. So it's still some work to do, but obviously it's just trying to show you how a little bit of work can really improve the look of your course. So yeah, I mean, that's me done. So for this one, and what I'll be doing in the next one, I would think, is putting in a walkway and maybe